Hey folks, before the video starts, please leave a like and subscribe to cheer me up. Make sure you are relaxed and enjoy today's stories. I found a dark web page full of my photos, taken while I was sleeping. I've never been a paranoid person. I've always thought that the people who tape over their webcam and use 10 different VPNs were overreacting. That was until I found something on the dark web that shook me to my core. This isn't easy for me to write, but I need to get it out. Maybe it'll help someone avoid the hell I'm going through right now. It all started about 2 months ago. I'm a bit of a tech nerd, and sometimes I explore the dark web out of sheer curiosity. I know, it's a risky thing to do, but I've always been careful. I'd read stories about the dark web, both creepy and fascinating, and wanted to see some of it for myself. So one night, I decided to delve into the depths of the internet. I started browsing random forums and marketplaces, most of which were filled with typical dark web stuff. Drugs, weapons, fake IDs. Nothing that really stood out or seemed particularly interesting. After a while, I came across a forum thread titled Slumbering Beauties. The name intrigued me. I clicked on it. The first post was from a user named Nightwatcher. It simply said, "Welcome to the gallery of the unknowing." Below it was a link. My heart was pounding with a mix of excitement and fear as I clicked the link. It led me to a site that looked pretty basic. The homepage had a black background with white text and a bunch of thumbnail images. The pictures were all of people sleeping. At first, I thought it was some kind of fetish site, which was creepy enough, but nothing too shocking for the dark web. I clicked on a few images, and that's when I realized something that made my blood run cold. These weren't just random people. They were people in their own homes, in their own beds. The camera angles were all wrong for these to be selfies, or even pictures taken by someone they knew. It looked like the photos were taken by hidden cameras. I was about to close the tab when I noticed a familiar face in one of the thumbnails. It was small, but I could swear it was me. I clicked on it, and my screen filled with an image of me, sleeping in my own bed. My heart nearly stopped. There I was, sprawled out on my bed, wearing the same pajamas I had on just a few nights ago. The angle was from the corner of my ceiling, like it had been taken by a hidden camera. I started to panic. How could this be possible? I lived alone in a small apartment, and I had never noticed any cameras. I immediately got up and began searching my bedroom. I tore the place apart, checking every corner, every inch of the ceiling, the smoke detector, even the light fixtures. Nothing. There were no cameras, no signs of anyone having been there. I went back to my computer and scrolled through more of the photos on the site. There were dozens of them, all of different people, all taken in the same creepy, voyeuristic manner. The more I looked, the more I started to notice something even more disturbing. In almost every photo, there was a shadowy figure lurking in the background, just barely visible. Sometimes it was just a hand or leg. Other times, it was a full silhouette standing by the bed, watching the person sleep. I clicked on more images, scrolling frantically, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. That's when I found another photo of myself. This time, I wasn't alone. In the corner of the room, half hidden by the darkness, was a figure. It looked like a man, but his features were obscured. I felt sick to my stomach. Someone had been in my apartment, standing in my bedroom, while I slept, taking pictures of me. I slammed my laptop shut and sat there in the dark, trying to calm down. My mind was racing with a million thoughts. Who was this person? How did they get into my apartment? Why were they taking pictures of me? I couldn't think straight. I felt violated, scared, and helpless. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I called my landlord and demanded that he change the locks. I didn't tell him why, just said that I lost my keys and was worried someone might find them. He came by later that day and changed the locks for me. I also went out and bought a new security system with cameras that I installed myself. I felt a little better knowing that I had taken some precautions, but I was still on edge. For the next few nights, I barely slept. Every little noise made me jump, and I found myself constantly checking the security feed on my phone. I thought about going to the police, but what would I tell them? That I found creepy pictures of myself on the dark web. They'd probably laugh me out of the station. Besides, I had no proof of who was behind it, or how they were getting into my apartment. A week later, I decided to check the dark website again. I don't know why. Maybe I hoped it was all some sick joke, or that the site would be gone, but it was still there, and there were even more pictures. I found another one of myself, taken just a few nights before, despite the new locks and security system. In this photo, the figure was closer, almost standing right next to my bed. The detail in the picture was clearer too. I could see the glint of a knife in his hand. I broke down. This wasn't just some sick voyeur anymore. This person had been in my apartment multiple times, getting closer and closer, and I had no idea who they were or what they wanted. I felt like I was living in a nightmare. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't keep living like this, in constant fear. So I decided to set a trap. I set up additional hidden cameras around my apartment, ones that even I could barely notice. I also made sure my security system was on and working properly. Then I waited. That night, I pretended to go to sleep as usual, but I stayed awake, my heart pounding in my chest. Hours passed, and nothing happened. I started to think maybe I was just being paranoid, that no one was actually coming into my apartment. But then, around 3 a.m., I heard a faint creak. My heart leapt into my throat. Someone was in my apartment. I stayed as still as possible, barely breathing, and listened. Footsteps, soft but unmistakable, were moving down the hallway towards my bedroom. I wanted to scream, to run, but I knew I had to stay calm and see this through. The footsteps stopped right outside my bedroom door. I could feel my pulse in my ears, my entire body trembling with fear. The door slowly creaked open, and I could see a shadowy figure standing there. He took a few steps into the room, and I saw the glint of the knife in his hand again. He stood there, watching me for what felt like an eternity. Then he raised the camera and took a picture. The flash of the camera lit up the room for a split second, and I could see his face. He was wearing a mask, but his eyes were visible, cold, empty, and full of malice. He turned and left the room, and I heard the front door open and close quietly behind him. I waited until I was sure he was gone before I moved. I grabbed my phone and checked the security feed. Sure enough, there he was, creeping through my apartment, taking pictures of me. I called the police immediately and told them everything. They came and checked my apartment, but there was no sign of forced entry. The hidden cameras I set up had captured footage of the intruder, but he was always careful to avoid showing his face. The police took the footage and promised to investigate, but I could tell they didn't really believe me. They probably thought I was some paranoid nutcase. That was a month ago, and I haven't heard anything from the police since. I moved out of my apartment and into a new place, but I still can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. Every night I lie awake, listening for any sound, any sign that someone is there. I can't sleep. I can't relax. My life has become a living hell. I don't know who this person is or why they're doing this to me, but I know one thing. They're still out there, watching, waiting, and I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again. A month has passed since that night, and every shadow feels like it's hiding a monster. I moved to a new place, a bit out of the city, hoping the extra distance and isolation would give me peace. But peace is a fleeting illusion now. Sleep is a distant memory, replaced by endless nights of terror and vigilance. I've become a prisoner of my own mind, haunted by the images of that masked figure standing over my bed. The new place has a high-tech security system, motion detectors, cameras, reinforced locks, you name it. But no matter how many layers of protection I add, the paranoia seeps through. I keep telling myself I'm safe here, but it's hard to believe it when every creak and groan of the house sets my nerves on edge. About a week into my new residence, I decided to dive back into the dark web. I know, it sounds insane, but I needed answers. I needed to know if the slumbering beauty's site had more photos of me, if my tormentor was still watching. The rational part of me screamed against it, but desperation overruled. I booted up my laptop, connected through multiple VPNs, and accessed the dark web. My hands were shaking as I typed in the URL. The familiar black page with white text greeted me, and my stomach churned. I hesitated for a moment before scrolling through the latest uploads. The usual mix of sleeping people and that eerie sense of invasion washed over me. Then I saw it. A new photo of me in my new bedroom. The blood drained from my face. I recognized the room immediately. The plain white walls, the new sheets I'd bought just days ago. The photo was crystal clear, taken from an angle that suggested the camera was right above my bed. My eyes widened in horror as I spotted something new in this photo. The figure wasn't standing in the corner anymore. He was sitting on the edge of my bed, mere inches from my face. I slammed my laptop shut and backed away, my mind racing. How did he find me? How did he get in? The new locks, the security system, it was all supposed to keep me safe. I felt a wave of nausea and stumbled to the bathroom, barely making it to the toilet before vomiting. I leaned against the wall, shaking uncontrollably. This was no longer just an invasion of my privacy. It was a direct threat to my life. I spent the next few hours in a daze, trying to figure out my next move. Calling the police again felt useless. They hadn't been able to do anything before. But I couldn't just sit here, waiting for the next intrusion. I needed to take matters into my own hands. That night, I stayed awake again, my senses on high alert. I had armed myself with a baseball bat and pepper spray, ready to confront the intruder if he dared to show up. Hours dragged by, and every minute felt like an eternity. I stared at the door, listening for any sign of movement. Around 2 a.m., the motion detector in the living room went off. My heart leapt into my throat. I grabbed the bat and crept towards the door, my hands slick with sweat. The silence was deafening, and every step felt like it echoed through the house. I peeked through the crack of the door and saw nothing. The living room was empty. My mind raced. Was it a false alarm? Or was he hiding, waiting for me to let my guard down? Suddenly, the motion detector in the hallway triggered. I spun around, my pulse pounding in my ears. The hallway light flickered, casting eerie shadows along the walls. I gripped the bat tighter, inching my way towards the sound. My breathing was shallow and rapid, each step feeling heavier than the last. Then I saw him, a figure at the end of the hallway, barely illuminated by the flickering light. He was wearing the same mask, and in his hand, the glint of the knife was unmistakable. My blood ran cold as I locked eyes with him, my worst nightmare standing just a few feet away. "Who the hell are you?" I shouted, my voice shaking. He didn't respond. Instead, he took a step forward, the knife catching the light as he raised it slightly. I could see his eyes through the mask, dark, empty, devoid of any humanity. Fear surged through me, but I knew I couldn't back down. I raised the bat, ready to swing. "Stay back," I yelled, trying to muster as much authority as I could. He paused for a moment, tilting his head as if considering his next move. Then, with a speed that took me by surprise, he lunged at me. I swung the bat with all my strength, connecting with his arm. He grunted and staggered back, but didn't drop the knife. Panic took over, and I swung again, this time hitting his shoulder. He stumbled, and I took the opportunity to run. I bolted towards the front door, adrenaline pumping through my veins. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps fast and heavy. I fumbled with the lock, my hands trembling, and finally yanked the door open. I ran outside, screaming for help. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, and my voice echoed in the night. I looked back and saw him standing in the doorway, watching me. He didn't chase me. He just stood there, the knife glinting in the moonlight. My neighbors started to come out, drawn by the commotion. I ran to the nearest house, pounding on the door and begging for help. The police arrived within minutes, but by then, the intruder was gone. They searched my house, but found no sign of him. The footage from my security cameras showed him entering through a window I had overlooked, bypassing the motion detectors. He had known exactly where to go, what to avoid. It was like he had done this 1,000 times before. The police took my statement and promised to increase patrols in the area, but I could tell they didn't have much hope of catching him. I felt a sinking dread settle in my stomach. This wasn't over. He would come back. He always came back. I couldn't stay there any longer. I packed a bag and left that night, driving aimlessly until I found a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. I paid in cash and didn't give my real name, hoping to stay off the grid. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before he found me again. As I lay on the lumpy motel bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized I was living in a nightmare with no end in sight. Every night, I wondered if it would be the last night I'd see. Every shadow, every creak, every flicker of light felt like a harbinger of doom. I don't know what to do. I'm trapped in this never-ending cycle of fear and paranoia. All I can do is keep moving, keep hiding, and hope that one day this nightmare will end. But for now, the darkness is my constant companion, and sleep is a luxury I can no longer afford. Living in motels, switching locations every few days, has become my new normal. Each move is driven by the terror that he might find me again. The few belongings I have are packed hastily into a duffel bag, always ready for a quick escape. The nights are the hardest, as every noise makes me jump, every shadow looks like him. My mind is in a constant state of dread. I've been keeping a low profile, paying in cash, avoiding any traceable actions. But despite all this, the fear lingers, gnawing at my sanity. I've taken to scouring the internet for any information that might help me understand who this person is and why he's targeting me. It's like searching for a needle in a haystack, but it's the only thing that keeps me from going completely insane. One evening, I decided to dive back into the dark web against my better judgment. Maybe there was something I missed, some clue that could help me figure this out. I logged in through a secure connection, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. The familiar black screen and white text of the Slumbering Beauties site greeted me once again. I scrolled through the latest uploads, my stomach churning with every image. There were new photos of other people, all taken in their most vulnerable moments. The same figure appeared in many of them, lurking in the shadows, watching. Then I saw another photo of myself. This one was different. It wasn't just me sleeping. It was a picture of me in the motel room I was currently staying in. My blood ran cold. He had found me again. The photo was taken from outside the window, through the small gap in the curtains. The timestamp showed it was taken just hours earlier. I felt a wave of nausea and ran to the window, ripping the curtains open. There was no one there, but the sense of being watched was overwhelming. I closed the curtains and backed away, my mind racing. How did he keep finding me? I spent the rest of the night in a state of heightened paranoia, jumping at every sound. Morning couldn't come fast enough. As soon as the sun rose, I packed my things and checked out of the motel. I drove for hours, putting as much distance as I could between me and that place. I found another motel, even more run down than the last, and checked in under a fake name. I needed help. This was beyond anything I could handle on my own. I decided to contact a private investigator. I found one online who specialized in cases like mine: stalking, harassment, things the police often couldn't or wouldn't handle. His name was Tom, and he agreed to meet me at a diner in a nearby town. Tom was an older guy, grizzled and worn, with a no-nonsense attitude. I explained everything to him: the photos, the intruder, the constant fear. He listened intently, taking notes, and asked a few questions. He didn't seem surprised, which was oddly comforting. "Sounds like you've got a real sicko on your hands," he said, his voice gravelly. "But don't worry, we'll get to the bottom of this. First, we need to figure out how he's tracking you. Do you have any electronics that he could be using? Your phone, laptop?" I handed over my phone and laptop, and he started to inspect them. "People like this are usually pretty tech-savvy," he explained. "They can install tracking software without you even knowing. We'll check for any signs of tampering." After a thorough check, Tom found a hidden tracking app on my phone. It was well disguised, buried deep in the system files. He removed it and suggested getting a new phone altogether, just to be safe. He also found a small device attached to the underside of my car, a GPS tracker. My stomach churned at the realization of how close this guy had been, how easily he had invaded my life. "We'll get you a burner phone and switch out your car," Tom said. "It'll make it harder for him to find you. But we also need to set a trap, lure him out into the open." The idea of baiting this guy terrified me, but I knew it was the only way to stop him. We came up with a plan. Tom would stay with me in the next motel, monitoring everything while I pretended to go about my normal routine. If the intruder showed up, Tom would catch him in the act. The next few days were tense. We checked into a new motel under false names, and Tom set up his equipment, hidden cameras, motion detectors, the works. I tried to act normal, but every fiber of my being was on edge, waiting for the inevitable. It didn't take long. On the third night, the motion detector went off. Tom signaled for me to stay put while he checked the cameras. I watched the monitor, my heart racing. There he was, the masked figure, creeping through the parking lot towards my room. Tom moved quietly to the door, his gun drawn. I held my breath, watching as the figure approached the window. He was about to peek inside when Tom threw the door open, gun aimed at the intruder. "Freeze! Police!" The figure turned and bolted faster than I thought possible. Tom chased after him, but the intruder disappeared into the night. My heart sank. We were so close, yet he had slipped through our fingers again. Tom came back, frustrated but determined. "We'll get him," he assured me. "He's getting bolder, and that'll be his downfall." The next few days were a blur. Tom stayed with me, and we moved motels frequently, trying to stay one step ahead. But the intruder was always one step behind, always watching, waiting. It was a game of cat and mouse, and I was the prize. Then one night, everything changed. I was in the bathroom, getting ready for bed, when I heard a noise outside. I froze, listening. Footsteps, faint but unmistakable, approaching the door. I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy ceramic vase, and waited. The door creaked open, and I saw the shadowy figure enter. This time, he wasn't alone. Another figure followed him, this one taller, bulkier. They moved silently, methodically, like they had done this many times before. I stepped out of the bathroom, my heart pounding. "Get out!" I shouted, raising the vase. The figures turned to face me. The taller one stepped forward, and I saw a flash of metal, a knife. My blood ran cold. This was it. I was going to die. Suddenly, Tom burst through the door, gun drawn. "Drop the knife," he shouted. The figures hesitated for a moment, then lunged at Tom. He fired, and the sound of the gunshot echoed through the room. One of the figures dropped, clutching his shoulder. The other turned and fled. Tom rushed to my side, his face pale. "Are you okay?" I nodded, too shocked to speak. The wounded intruder was on the floor, moaning in pain. Tom called the police, and within minutes, the room was swarming with officers. They took the injured intruder into custody and searched the area for the other one, but he was long gone. I gave my statement, feeling a strange mix of relief and terror. One of them was caught, but the other was still out there. The police identified the captured intruder as a known stalker with a history of breaking and entering. He refused to talk, but they found evidence linking him to the slumbering beauty's site. It was a small victory, but it didn't bring me much comfort. The other intruder, the one who had been watching me all this time, was still free. Tom stayed with me for a few more days, helping me transition to a safer location. I got a new phone, a new car, and we set up a secure communication line. He promised to keep investigating, to track down the remaining intruder, but I knew it would be a long, hard road. As I settled into another motel room, my mind kept replaying the events of the past few months. The fear, the paranoia, the constant feeling of being hunted. I knew I had to stay strong, to keep fighting, but the exhaustion was overwhelming. Every night I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he would come for me again. The darkness was my enemy, and sleep was a distant dream. I didn't know if I'd ever feel safe again. But for now, all I could do was keep moving, keep hiding, and hope that one day this nightmare would end. Another week passed, each day blending into the next in a haze of fear and exhaustion. My new routine consisted of constantly looking over my shoulder, checking the security feed, and waiting for Tom's updates. He had been relentless in his investigation, but the second intruder remained a ghost, leaving no trace. One night, while I was lying in bed, I heard a faint knock on my door. My heart skipped a beat. I grabbed my phone and checked the security feed. It was Tom. I breathed a sigh of relief and opened the door. He looked more tired than usual, dark circles under his eyes, but there was a determination in his expression that gave me hope. "I've got something," he said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. He set up his laptop on the small table and showed me what he'd found. It was a forum on the dark web, not unlike the Slumbering Beauties site, but this one was different. It was a place where people shared tips and tricks for stalking, breaking and entering, and avoiding detection. It was a community of predators. "This is where our guy is getting his info," Tom said, scrolling through the posts. "He's been active here for years, learning, adapting, but he slipped up. He posted something recently that gave us a clue." Tom clicked on a post by a user named Silent Shadow. The message was short, but it included a photo, a screenshot of a security camera feed showing me and Tom in one of the motels. The caption read, "Getting closer." My blood ran cold. He was taunting us, watching our every move. But Tom pointed to a detail in the background of the photo, a reflection in a window. It was faint, but you could make out the silhouette of a building. "I recognize that building," Tom said. "It's an old warehouse on the outskirts of a town. If we're lucky, he's using it as a base." We devised a plan. It was risky, but we were running out of options. Tom would stake out the warehouse, and I would act as bait, drawing the intruder out. I hated the idea of putting myself in danger again, but it was the only way to stop this nightmare. The next day, Tom set up near the warehouse with his equipment, while I checked into a nearby motel. The hours dragged by, my nerves frayed to the breaking point. Every sound, every flicker of movement outside made my heart race. I kept checking my phone, waiting for Tom's signal. Around midnight, Tom sent me a message. "He's here. Stay ready." My hands trembled as I put the phone down and tried to calm my breathing. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. I glanced around the room, making sure everything was in place. The plan was simple. I would make noise, draw him into the room, and Tom would catch him in the act. Minutes felt like hours as I waited, every second stretching into eternity. Then I heard it, the sound of a window sliding open. My blood turned to ice. He was here. I took a deep breath and knocked over a chair, making as much noise as possible. The footsteps grew louder, and I saw a shadow move outside the door. I grabbed the pepper spray from my bag and stood by the bed, ready to defend myself. The door creaked open and the masked figure stepped inside, knife in hand. My heart raced, but I held my ground. "You won't get away with this," I said, my voice trembling. He took a step closer, raising the knife. I sprayed the pepper spray directly into his eyes. He screamed, dropping the knife and clutching his face. At that moment, Tom burst through the door, gun drawn. "Hands up!" Tom shouted. The intruder, blinded and in pain, staggered back, but didn't comply. Tom tackled him to the ground, securing him with zip ties. I backed away, my entire body shaking with adrenaline and fear. Tom called the police, and they arrived within minutes. The intruder was taken into custody, and this time there was no escape. The police searched the warehouse and found a trove of disturbing evidence, photos, videos, and detailed notes on his stalking activities. It was enough to ensure he'd be locked away for a long time. As the officers led him away, I caught a glimpse of his face. He was an ordinary-looking man, the kind you'd pass on the street without a second thought, but his eyes were cold, devoid of any remorse. He stared at me, a chilling smile playing on his lips. "This isn't over," he whispered. "There are others." His words sent a shiver down my spine. I felt a mixture of relief and dread. He was caught, but the nightmare wasn't over. There were others out there, lurking in the shadows, watching. The police took my statement and assured me they'd do everything to ensure my safety. Tom stayed with me, helping me process everything that had happened. We knew this was just one victory in a much larger battle. Over the next few days, I tried to regain some semblance of normalcy. It was difficult, knowing that I was still being watched, that there were others like him out there, but I took solace in the fact that one of them was behind bars, unable to hurt anyone else. Tom continued his investigation, delving deeper into the dark web, uncovering more of these twisted communities. He became my lifeline, a constant source of support and reassurance. We knew we couldn't stop every predator out there, but we could fight back, piece by piece. As I sat in yet another motel room, I reflected on everything that had happened. My life had been turned upside down, my sense of security shattered, but I was still here, still fighting. I wasn't going to let them win. The darkness was still out there, but I wasn't alone. With Tom's help, I had a chance to reclaim my life, to find some measure of peace. It would be a long road, but I was ready to face it. In the weeks that followed, things slowly began to stabilize. I moved into a more secure location, a small house in a quiet neighborhood, equipped with state-of-the-art security systems. Tom helped me set up everything, ensuring there were no blind spots or vulnerabilities. Despite these measures, the fear lingered, a constant shadow over my life. Tom had become more than just an investigator. He was a friend. His relentless pursuit of the truth gave me hope. He kept me updated on his findings, and while there were still dark corners of the internet teeming with predators, we had made a significant dent. The community we had exposed was in disarray, many of its members going into hiding or being arrested. One evening, Tom came over with a grim look on his face. "I think we need to talk," he said, sitting down at the kitchen table. "I found something, and it's disturbing." I sat across from him, my stomach churning with anxiety. "What is it?" He opened his laptop and pulled up a series of images. They were screenshots from a live stream on the dark web, showing a person tied to a chair in a dark room. The person was blindfolded and gagged, their heads slumped forward. "This was streamed last night," Tom explained. The message with the stream was clear. They're retaliating. They want to show that they're still in control. My heart raced as I recognized the person in the chair. It was one of the police officers who had been involved in the initial investigation. The stream had been taken down, but the message was clear. They were coming for anyone who had interfered. "We need to be careful," Tom said, his voice serious. "They're desperate, and that makes them dangerous." That night, I couldn't sleep. The images of the live stream haunted me, and the reality of the situation hit hard. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about anyone who had tried to help. I felt a deep sense of guilt and responsibility. The next morning, Tom and I devised a plan. We would go on the offensive, using the information we had gathered to dismantle their network. It was risky, but it was the only way to end this nightmare, once and for all. Tom spent days compiling data, tracing connections, and identifying key players. We shared our findings with the authorities, who launched a coordinated effort to bring down the network. Raids were conducted, arrests were made, and slowly the dark web community that had terrorized me began to crumble. Despite the progress, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still lurking in the shadows. One night, as I was reviewing the security footage, I noticed something odd. A figure, barely visible, moving near the edge of the property. My heart pounded as I zoomed in, trying to get a better look. It was him, the second intruder, the one who had escaped. I called Tom immediately, and he arrived within minutes. We reviewed the footage together, confirming my worst fears. He was still out there, watching, waiting for his moment to strike. "We need to set another trap," Tom said, determination in his eyes. "This ends tonight." We prepared the house, setting up additional cameras and alarms. I stayed in the living room, the lights dimmed, pretending to be engrossed in a book. Tom hid in the shadows, his gun ready. We waited, the tension thick in the air. Hours passed, and just when I thought he might not show, the motion detector outside beeped softly. My pulse quickened. Tom signaled for me to stay calm, his eyes focused on the monitor. The figure moved closer, creeping towards the back door. I held my breath, gripping the edge of the couch. The door creaked open, and the masked intruder stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room. "Now!" Tom shouted, leaping from his hiding spot. The intruder turned, his knife glinting in the dim light. Tom fired a warning shot, but the intruder lunged at him, the knife slashing through the air. I screamed, grabbing a nearby lamp and smashing it over the intruder's head. He staggered, giving Tom the opening he needed to subdue him. The police arrived shortly after, taking the intruder into custody. As they led him away, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was over. The man who had haunted my nightmares was finally caught. In the days that followed, I began to rebuild my life. The constant fear started to fade, replaced by a cautious optimism. Tom continued his work, helping others who had been victimized by similar networks. We stayed in touch, his support a constant source of strength. One evening, as I sat on the porch, watching the sunset, I reflected on everything that had happened. The ordeal had changed me, but it had also made me stronger. I knew there were still dangers out there, but I also knew I had the strength to face them. The dark web is a place of nightmares, a hidden world where predators lurk. But I had learned that even in the darkest corners, there is hope. With the right help, the right determination, you can fight back, and that's what I intended to do. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I took a deep breath and closed my eyes. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. The nightmare was over, but the fight for justice would continue, and I was ready to face whatever came next. I received a USB from the dark web. It contains evidence of a crime I didn't commit. Hey everyone, this is my first time posting here, but I don't know where else to turn. I'm in a serious mess, and I need to get this out before something happens to me. So here's what happened. It all started about 2 weeks ago. I'm not proud of it, but I have a bit of a curiosity when it comes to the dark web. It's like a black hole that you know you shouldn't go near, but you can't help but be drawn to it. Usually, I just browse around, read some conspiracy theories, or buy weird little trinkets. Nothing major, you know? One night, I came across a forum thread about a guy selling exclusive USB drives. The post claimed they contained videos and pictures that were guaranteed to blow your mind. It was vague and kind of sketchy, but my curiosity got the better of me. I messaged the seller, and after a bit of haggling, I sent him $200 in Bitcoin. A week later, a small unmarked package arrived at my door. I was excited, like a kid on Christmas morning. I ripped open the package, and inside was a plain black USB drive. No markings, no branding, just a USB. I rushed to my computer, plugged it in, and opened the only folder on it. Exposed. There were dozens of video files, all named with random strings of numbers and letters. I clicked on the first one. It was a grainy, shaky video of what looked like an abandoned warehouse. The camera panned around slowly, showing rusty machinery, broken windows, and debris scattered everywhere. The audio was just a low hum, like white noise. Then the camera focused on something in the corner. It was a chair, and there was a person tied to it. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman because their head was covered with a dirty sack. My heart started pounding as I watched. The person was struggling, trying to scream, but it was muffled by the sack. Suddenly, a figure stepped into the frame. They were wearing a black hoodie and a mask. The figure walked up to the person in the chair and pulled out a knife. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as the masked figure began to cut into the person's arm. Blood poured out, and the muffled screams grew more frantic. I couldn't take it anymore and closed the video. I sat there breathing heavily, trying to process what I had just seen. Part of me wanted to call the police, but what would I tell them? That I bought a USB off the dark web and found a snuff film? They'd probably arrest me just for having it. I decided to take a break, get some fresh air. But when I stepped outside, I felt like I was being watched. Every shadow seemed to move. Every noise made me jump. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, was watching me. I went back inside, locked all the doors, and decided to watch another video. Maybe it was just a sick prank, and the next video would be different. But it wasn't. Each video was worse than the last. Torture, murder, things I can't even describe without feeling sick. Then I found a video that made my blood run cold. It was my apartment. The camera was filming from outside, looking through my window. It was recent too. I recognized the shirt I was wearing. The camera zoomed in on me, sitting at my computer, watching the videos. My stomach dropped. Someone had been outside my apartment, filming me. I yanked the USB out of my computer and threw it across the room. I felt violated, exposed. Whoever had sent this to me knew where I lived, knew what I was doing. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every noise made me jump. Every shadow looked like a person. The next morning, I decided to go to the police. I took the USB with me and tried to explain what had happened. They looked at me like I was crazy, but they took the USB and said they'd investigate. I went home, hoping that would be the end of it, but it wasn't. That night, I received an email from an anonymous address. The subject line just said, "We know." The email contained a single attachment, a photo of me taken through my bedroom window, while I slept. I don't know what to do. I'm scared for my life. I don't know who these people are or what they want from me. I can't go to the police, and I can't stay here. If anyone has any advice, please, I'm begging you, help me. After that terrifying email, I knew I couldn't stay in my apartment any longer. I packed a bag with some essentials and checked into a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. The place was dingy, but at least I felt a bit safer. I needed to lay low and figure out my next move. I spent the first night in the motel staring at the ceiling, jumping at every creak and groan the old building made. By the time the sun came up, I hadn't slept a wink. I decided to try and piece together who could be behind this. The dark web seller was my first suspect, but how would they know my address? It didn't make sense. I went back to the police station, desperate for any update on their investigation. The officer I spoke to looked at me with a mixture of pity and frustration. He told me that they couldn't trace the USB back to anyone and suggested I might have been pranked by someone who knew me. They hadn't found anything useful on the USB itself, just the videos I described. Feeling hopeless, I returned to the motel. When I got back, I noticed something odd. The lock on my room door looked like it had been tampered with. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly pushed the door open. The room looked just as I had left it, but something felt off. I searched through my bag and found everything in order, except for my laptop. It was powered on, the screen showing a video file ready to play. I hesitated, but my curiosity got the better of me. I clicked play. The video started with a view of my motel room, from the same angle as the peephole in the door. Someone had been watching me. The camera zoomed in on me as I left the room earlier. Then the camera moved, and I saw a gloved hand use a key to unlock the door. My blood ran cold as the person behind the camera entered the room and walked over to my bag, rummaging through it before placing the laptop on the table and starting the video recording. The video ended with the camera focusing on a note placed on the table. I looked around the room and found the note exactly where it had been in the video. It read, "You can't hide from us. We are always watching." My first instinct was to run, but where would I go? I couldn't live like this, always looking over my shoulder, never feeling safe. I needed to get some help, someone who could actually do something. I thought about hiring a private investigator, someone who could look into this without the bureaucracy of the police. The next day, I met with a private investigator named Jack. He had a reputation for taking on difficult cases, and I hoped he could help me. I explained everything to him, from the USB to the emails and the video in my motel room. Jack listened carefully, taking notes and asking detailed questions. When I finished, he promised to look into it and get back to me as soon as he found anything. I spent the next few days in a state of constant anxiety. Jack kept in touch, but there were no leads. It seemed like whoever was behind this was always one step ahead. Then one evening, I received another email from the anonymous address. This time, it was a video attachment. I opened it with trembling hands. The video was from a hidden camera in my motel room, showing me sitting on the bed, talking on the phone with Jack. The audio was clear, capturing every word of our conversation. My blood ran cold as I realized they had bugged my room. The camera angle shifted, and I saw a figure standing outside my window, watching me. I felt a surge of fear and rage. I grabbed the curtains and yanked them open, but no one was there. My phone buzzed with a new message from Jack. It read, "Get out of there now. You're not safe." Without thinking, I grabbed my bag and bolted out of the room. I jumped into my car and drove aimlessly, my mind racing. I ended up in another motel, even further out of town, and barricaded myself in the room. I texted Jack my new location, and he replied with a promise to send someone to keep an eye on me. That night, I barely slept, clutching a kitchen knife under the covers. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow looked like a person. I kept thinking about the videos, the emails, and the feeling of being watched. It was driving me insane. In the early hours of the morning, there was a knock at my door. I froze, gripping the knife tighter. The knock came again, louder this time. I crept to the door and peered through the peephole. It was Jack. I let out a sigh of relief and opened the door, letting him in. Jack looked serious, more serious than I'd ever seen him. He told me that he'd found something. The seller of the USB drive was a known criminal, involved in blackmail and extortion. He believed they were trying to frame me for something, but he didn't know what. He warned me to stay hidden and keep in touch. As Jack left, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe there was a way out of this, but that hope was shattered when I received another email, this time with a single image attached. It was a picture of my parents' house, taken from the front yard. The message read, "We know where they live. Don't think you can run." My heart sank. I realized that this wasn't just about me anymore. My family was in danger. I needed to end this once and for all. But how? I felt trapped, helpless, like a pawn in a game I didn't understand. And that's when I made the biggest mistake of my life. I decided to confront them. I knew confronting these people was a reckless idea, but I felt cornered. They knew where my family lived, and I couldn't let anything happen to them. Desperation makes you do stupid things. I decided to go back to the dark web, back to the forum where I had bought the USB. I created a new anonymous account and posted a message asking to meet the seller in person. I made it sound like I had more money and wanted to buy more content. To my surprise, I received a reply within an hour. The message was short and direct. "Meet me at the old warehouse on 5th Street at midnight. Come alone." I spent the rest of the day in a haze of anxiety and fear, constantly looking over my shoulder. When the time came, I grabbed my knife and drove to the warehouse. It was the same one from the first video. The image of that rusty machinery and broken windows was burned into my mind. The place was even more intimidating in real life, shrouded in darkness, with only the faint glow of streetlights illuminating the area. I parked a few blocks away and walked to the warehouse, every step feeling heavier than the last. My heart pounded in my chest, and my palms were sweaty as I gripped the knife in my pocket. I reached the entrance and pushed the creaky door open. The sound echoed through the empty space, making me jump. Inside, it was pitch black, except for a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling in the center of the room. Underneath it stood a man in a black hoodie and mask. He turned to face me as I approached, and I could see his eyes glinting in the dim light. "You must be the curious one," he said, his voice cold and menacing. "The one who couldn't leave well enough alone." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why are you doing this? What do you want from me?" He chuckled, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "You made yourself an easy target. All that curiosity, poking around where you shouldn't. We decided to have a little fun." "Fun?" I spat. anger boiling inside me. You call this fun? You're terrorizing me, stalking me, threatening my family. He stepped closer, and I could see the glint of a knife in his hand. Oh, it's much more than that. You see, we needed someone like you. Someone with no connections, no one who would be missed. Someone we could frame. My mind raced, trying to understand. Frame me? For what? He didn't answer. Instead, he lunged at me, and I barely had time to react. I pulled out my knife and slashed wildly, catching him on the arm. He let out a grunt of pain, but didn't stop. He tackled me to the ground, and we struggled, the knives flashing. In the dim light, I managed to roll away and get to my feet. But he was quick, faster than I expected. He slashed at me, and I felt a sharp pain in my side. I staggered back, clutching the wound, blood seeping through my fingers. You're in over your head, he said, advancing on me. You should have stayed away. I felt dizzy, the pain making it hard to focus, but I couldn't give up. I thought about my family, about how they were in danger because of me. Summoning all my strength, I charged at him, knife raised. He was caught off guard, and I managed to stab him in the shoulder. He cried out and fell to the ground, dropping his knife. I stood over him, breathing heavily, blood dripping from my side. Who are you? I demanded. Who's behind this? He laughed, a harsh guttural sound. You'll never know. This goes higher than you can imagine. You're just a pawn. Before I could respond, he pulled something from his pocket. A small device with a single button. He pressed it, and I heard a series of beeps. My heart sank as I realized what it was. A remote detonator. You might have won this round, he said, his voice weakening, but you won't make it out alive. Panic surged through me as I turned and ran, the beeping growing louder. I reached the door and threw it open, sprinting into the night. Behind me, the warehouse exploded in a deafening roar, the force of the blast knocking me off my feet. I hit the ground hard, pain shooting through my body. I lay there, dazed, the world spinning around me. My ears rang, and I could barely move. Somehow, I managed to get to my feet and stumble to my car. I drove in a daze, not knowing where to go, just needing to get away. Eventually, I ended up back at Jack's office. He took one look at me and rushed me inside, calling for an ambulance. As I sat there, bleeding and exhausted, I tried to piece together what had just happened. Who were these people? Why had they chosen me? And what was their endgame? Jack stayed with me until the ambulance arrived, his face etched with concern. We'll get to the bottom of this, he promised. You're not alone in this fight. But as they loaded me into the ambulance, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Whoever was behind this was still out there, watching, waiting, and they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. As the ambulance sped towards the hospital, I closed my eyes, praying that somehow we could end this nightmare. The next few days were a blur of hospital rooms, doctors, and painkillers. The explosion had left me with a few broken ribs and a nasty gash on my side, but I was lucky to be alive. Jack visited me every day, bringing updates on his investigation and reassuring me that he was getting closer to finding out who was behind all this. One afternoon, as I lay in my hospital bed, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. My heart skipped a beat as I opened it, fearing the worst. The message read, "Nice try. We're not done with you yet." Attached was a video file. With trembling hands, I played the video. It was footage from inside the hospital. showing Jack talking to a nurse at the front desk. The camera followed him as he walked down the hall towards my room. They were here. They knew exactly where I was. Panic set in, and I pressed the call button for the nurse. When she arrived, I told her everything, my words coming out in a frantic rush. She looked at me with a mixture of concern and disbelief, but promised to inform the hospital security. Jack arrived a few hours later, looking more haggard than ever. He had dark circles under his eyes, and his usual confident demeanor was cracked. "We need to move you," he said quietly. "They've got people inside the hospital. It's not safe here." We concocted a plan to sneak me out. That night, under the cover of darkness, Jack and a couple of his trusted friends wheeled me out in a gurney, disguised as a deceased patient being transferred to the morgue. It was a morbid plan, but it worked. We got out without raising any alarms. Jack took me to a safe house, a small secluded cabin in the woods that belonged to a friend of his. It was far enough off the grid that we hoped it would take them a while to find me. The cabin was rustic but comfortable, with enough supplies to last us a while. The next few days were tense but quiet. Jack stayed in constant contact with his team, trying to trace the anonymous messages and find any leads on the people behind this nightmare. Meanwhile, I tried to recover, both physically and mentally. The isolation of the cabin was both a blessing and a curse. It was peaceful, but the silence left too much room for my mind to wander. One evening, Jack and I were sitting by the fireplace, going over the case files. "I've been digging into the seller's background," Jack said, his voice low. "Turns out he's connected to a larger network of criminals, blackmail, extortion, even human trafficking. They're using the dark web to find their victims, people they can manipulate or frame for their own ends." I shuddered at the thought. So I was just unlucky? A random target? Jack shook his head. "I don't think so. There's something more to this. They went to a lot of trouble to get to you. I think there's a reason they chose you specifically." I tried to recall anything that could have made me a target, but nothing made sense. I was just an ordinary guy with an ordinary job and life. Why me? Just as we were about to call it a night, there was a loud crash from the kitchen. Both of us jumped to our feet, my heart racing. Jack grabbed his gun and motioned for me to stay put. He moved silently towards the kitchen, his gun raised. I strained to hear, my breath catching in my throat. There were muffled voices, the sound of a struggle, and then a gunshot. I froze, fear gripping me. Jack reappeared a moment later, his face pale. "We need to go, now." He grabbed my arm and we rushed out the back door. We made it to the car, and Jack peeled out of the driveway, the tires kicking up gravel. As we sped down the dark, winding road, I glanced back and saw figures emerging from the shadows of the cabin. "Who were they?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Professionals," Jack replied grimly. "They knew exactly where to find us. Someone tipped them off." We drove for hours, the tension between us palpable. Jack's phone buzzed with constant updates from his team. They had intercepted some communications indicating that the people after us were part of a larger syndicate. Whoever they were, they had resources and reach far beyond anything we had anticipated. We ended up in another safe house, this one a rundown apartment in a less savory part of town. It wasn't ideal, but it was anonymous. Jack's team had managed to secure a few more pieces of the puzzle. The cellar, the videos, the emails, it was all part of a coordinated effort to frame me for a series of crimes. including the murder of the man in the warehouse. As we settled into the apartment, the weight of the situation pressed down on me. I was being hunted, framed for crimes I didn't commit, and now my family was in danger. I felt like a pawn in a game I didn't understand, a game with no rules and no way to win. Jack tried to reassure me, but I could see the worry in his eyes. We were up against a powerful enemy, and our options were running out. That night, as I lay on the lumpy mattress, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of time. The shadowy figures closing in on us were relentless, and I knew that if we didn't find a way to stop them, they would destroy everything I cared about. I didn't sleep at all, haunted by the faces of the people in the videos, the cold, calculating voice of the man in the warehouse, and the constant fear that any moment could be my last. The next morning, Jack received a call that seemed to change everything. One of his contacts had managed to trace the source of the anonymous emails. They led back to a secure server linked to a known crime syndicate with ties to government officials and high-profile criminals. This was bigger than we ever imagined. We knew we had to act fast. Jack and I decided to take the fight to them. We couldn't keep running. It was time to confront the people behind this nightmare. We gathered what little information we had and prepared for what felt like a suicide mission. The location of the server was in an abandoned office building downtown. It was heavily guarded, but we had no choice. If we could access the server, we might find the evidence needed to clear my name and bring these bastards down. We arrived at the building just after midnight, armed with guns and a determination to end this once and for all. The streets were eerily quiet, the city's usual hum, replaced by an oppressive silence. Jack led the way, his eyes scanning for any signs of movement. As we approached the building, we spotted 2 guards at the entrance. Jack took one out with a silenced shot, and I managed to knock the other unconscious. We dragged their bodies into the shadows and moved inside. The building was dark and empty, a labyrinth of corridors and offices. We navigated through it, our footsteps echoing in the silence. My heart pounded in my chest, every shadow seeming to move, every creak making me jump. We reached the server room on the top floor. It was secured with a heavy steel door. Jack worked quickly to bypass the security system, his fingers flying over the keypad. Finally, the door clicked open, and we stepped inside. The room was filled with racks of servers, their lights blinking in the darkness. Jack plugged a USB drive into the main console and started downloading the files. As the progress bar inched forward, I kept watch, my nerves on edge. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. I turned to see a group of armed men approaching. "Jack, we've got company," I shouted. He cursed under his breath and quickened his pace. Just a few more seconds. The men stormed into the room, guns raised. A firefight erupted, bullets flying and sparks flashing. I fired back, taking cover behind a server rack. Jack finished the download and pulled the USB drive free, shoving it into his pocket. "We need to get out of here," he yelled. We fought our way out, the corridors now a battleground. I was running on pure adrenaline, my wounds forgotten in the chaos. We reached the stairwell and dashed down, bullets whizzing past us. My mind was a blur, focused only on survival. We burst out of the building into the night, but our escape was cut short by a black SUV skidding to a halt in front of us. Men in black suits jumped out, guns aimed at us. We were surrounded. A tall man stepped forward, his face hidden in the shadows. "You've been a thorn in our side for too long," he said, his voice cold and authoritative. "Hand over the drive." Jack and I exchanged a glance. We were outgunned and outnumbered, but we couldn't let them win. Jack slowly reached into his pocket, then suddenly threw the drive towards me. "Run!" he shouted. I caught the drive and bolted, the men firing after me. Jack tackled one of them, giving me a precious few seconds. I sprinted down the alley, my legs burning, my lungs on fire. I had no plan, no destination, just a single thought: survive. I ran for what felt like hours, my pursuers close behind. I ducked into a narrow alley, then another, trying to lose them in the maze of the city. Eventually, I found a hiding spot behind a dumpster, my breath ragged, my body trembling. I stayed there, hidden in the filth and darkness, until the sounds of pursuit faded. I didn't know what had happened to Jack, if he was alive or dead. All I had was the drive, and the hope that it contained the key to ending this nightmare. When I was sure it was safe, I made my way to a public library, using their computers to access the files on the drive. It was a treasure trove of information: names, dates, transactions, everything linking the syndicate to high-profile crimes and corrupt officials. Enough to bring them down if I could get it to the right people. I sent the files to every news outlet, every law enforcement agency I could think of. I included my story, my evidence, everything I had been through. Then I destroyed the drive and fled, hoping I had done enough. The next few days were a whirlwind of news reports and police raids. The syndicate was exposed, their leaders arrested, their operations dismantled. My name was cleared, but the scars remained. I never saw Jack again. I like to think he made it out, that he's still out there, fighting the good fight. As for me, I've started a new life, far away from the city, far from the shadows that haunted me. But every night, I lock my doors and check my windows, the memory of those dark days lingering in the back of my mind. I've learned to live with the fear, the paranoia, because I know they're still out there, watching, waiting, and I'll never let my guard down again. I thought I was buying a rare video game on the dark web. It was so much worse. I've always been a sucker for rare video games. There's something about owning a piece of gaming history that just gets me excited. So when I heard about an elusive horror game that was only available on the dark web, I couldn't resist. I should have known better, but my curiosity got the best of me. Now, I'm living in a nightmare I can't escape. I remember the night I found it. I was browsing through some sketchy forums, looking for any information on rare games. That's when I saw a post about a game called The Black Room. The description was vague, but intriguing. It was supposedly the scariest game ever made, with graphics and gameplay that were years ahead of its time. The only way to get it was through a private seller on the dark web. I followed the instructions to access the dark web, feeling a mix of excitement and fear. It wasn't my first time there, but it always gave me the creeps. After navigating through a maze of links and encrypted sites, I found the seller's page. The game was listed for a hefty price, but I didn't care. I had to have it. The transaction was simple enough. I transferred the Bitcoin, and a few minutes later, I received a download link. I hesitated for a moment before clicking it. Something about the whole situation felt off, but I pushed the feeling aside. I was too eager to play the game. The download was fast, and soon I had the game installed on my computer. The icon was a simple black square, ominous and unassuming. I double-clicked it, and my screen went dark. For a moment, I thought something had gone wrong, but then the title screen appeared. The Black Room was written in blood-red letters, with eerie music playing in the background. I started the game, and it was everything I hoped for and more. The graphics were incredibly realistic, almost too realistic. The game world was dark and oppressive, filled with shadows that seemed to move on their own. The sound design was equally impressive, with every creak and whisper sending chills down my spine. But as I played, I began to notice something strange. The game seemed to know things about me, personal things. My character would encounter items that mirrored things in my own life, like the exact model of my childhood toy or the book I was reading the night before. It was unsettling, but I brushed it off as a coincidence. Then the messages started. At first, they were subtle, hidden in the environment. A note on a table that read, "I see you." A whisper in the dark that sounded like my name, but they became more direct, more personal. "I know what you did," one message read. "You can't hide from me." I tried to quit the game, but the option was grayed out. Panic set in as I realized I was trapped. I tried to shut down my computer, but it wouldn't respond. The game continued, the screen flashing with the disturbing images and messages. "You're mine now," it said. "Forever." My heart was pounding, and I felt sick. I couldn't escape. The game was in control. I watched in horror as my character was tortured and mutilated, the screams echoing in my headphones. It was too real, too graphic. I felt every cut, every burn. The pain was unbearable. I don't know how long I played. Hours, maybe days. Time lost all meaning. I was exhausted, starving, but I couldn't stop. The game wouldn't let me. My room became a prison, the screen my tormentor. I saw things, horrible things, that no one should ever see. Images of death and suffering, too gruesome to describe. And then, the final message appeared. "I'm coming for you." The game shut off, and my screen went black. I was left in silence, shaking and terrified. I thought it was over, but it was only the beginning. That night, I heard footsteps outside my door. Slow, deliberate. They stopped right outside, and I held my breath, praying it was my imagination. But then the door handle turned, and I knew I wasn't alone. The door creaked open, and I saw a figure standing in the shadows. It was tall, with glowing red eyes and a twisted smile. It stepped into the room, and I could see its face. It was my character from the game, come to life. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I was paralyzed with fear. The figure moved closer, its eyes never leaving mine. "You're mine," it whispered, and I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. The pain from the game returned, sharper than ever. I was being tortured again, but this time it was real. I don't know how I survived that night. Somehow, I managed to escape, running blindly through the streets until I found help. But the figure is still out there, watching, waiting. I can feel its presence, even now. I'm trapped in a nightmare I can't wake up from, and I don't know how to escape. All I wanted was a rare video game. What I got was so much worse, and now I'm paying the price. After that night, my life was never the same. I couldn't stay in my apartment. Every shadow, every creak reminded me of that figure. I moved in with a friend, Matt, but I couldn't tell him the truth. Who would believe me? I just said I needed a change of scenery, that I was going through some stuff. He was cool about it, but I could tell he was curious. Living with Matt was better, but the fear followed me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I covered the windows, kept the lights on, and slept with a knife under my pillow. Sleep was rare and fitful, haunted by nightmares of that twisted smile and those glowing red eyes. One night, a week after I moved in, Matt and I were watching TV when the power went out. The sudden darkness sent my heart racing. "Just a blackout," Matt said, grabbing a flashlight. "Happens all the time around here." But I knew better. The air felt heavy, oppressive. I grabbed my knife and stood by the window, listening. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint sound of footsteps outside. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Hear what?" Matt asked, shining the flashlight around the room. "Shh, listen." We stood there, straining to hear. The footsteps were getting closer, deliberate and slow, just like that night. I could feel my blood turn to ice. Matt frowned. "Probably just an animal or something. Relax, man." But I couldn't relax. I knew it was back. "We need to go," I said, backing away from the window. "Now." Matt looked at me like I was crazy. "Go where? It's just a blackout. You're freaking out over nothing." But I wasn't. I knew we were in danger. Suddenly, the door flew open, and there it was, the figure from the game, standing in the doorway, its eyes glowing red in the darkness. "You can't escape," it whispered, its voice a raspy hiss. Matt screamed and dropped the flashlight. I lunged at the figure with my knife, but it swatted me away like I was nothing. Pain exploded in my chest as I hit the wall, and the knife clattered to the floor. The figure turned to Matt, who was frozen in terror. "Run!" I shouted, struggling to my feet, but it was too late. The figure grabbed Matt by the throat and lifted him off the ground. "No!" I screamed, trying to get up. The figure's eyes bored into mine as it squeezed. Matt's face turned purple, his eyes bulging. Then with a sickening crack, his neck snapped and his body went limp. "No, no, no," I sobbed, crawling toward Matt's lifeless body. The figure dropped him and turned to me. "You're mine," it whispered again, and I felt a cold hand wrap around my throat. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The room started to spin, and I felt myself slipping away. Just as I thought I was going to die, the figure let go. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. "This is just the beginning," it said. And then it was gone. The lights flickered back on, and I was alone in the room with Matt's body. I called the police, but what could I tell them? That a monster from a video game killed my friend. They'd locked me up in a psych ward. I said there was a break-in, that I didn't see who did it. They took my statement and left, but I could tell they didn't believe me. I didn't care. I just wanted to get out of there. I packed my things and left town that night. I didn't know where I was going, just that I needed to get as far away as possible. I ended up in a small town a few hundred miles away, staying in a cheap motel. It wasn't much, but it was safe. Or so I thought. The nightmares got worse. Every night I saw the figure, felt its cold hands on me. I woke up screaming, drenched in sweat. I was a wreck, barely eating or sleeping. I kept the lights on all the time, but it didn't help. I was living in constant fear. One night, as I was trying to distract myself with some mindless TV, I got a message on my phone. It was an unknown number, but the message made my blood run cold. "You can't hide from me." I dropped the phone, my hands shaking. How did it find me? I changed my number, my address, everything. It shouldn't have been possible. But then, nothing about this was possible. I knew I couldn't stay in one place for long. I started moving around, never staying more than a few days in one spot. I was always on edge, always looking over my shoulder, but no matter where I went, the messages followed. I'm coming for you. You're mine. I was running out of options, out of hope. The figure was relentless, always one step ahead. I knew I couldn't keep this up forever. I was exhausted, physically and mentally. I needed help, but who could I turn to? Who would believe me? Desperation led me to an online forum for paranormal experiences. It was a long shot, but I had nothing left to lose. I posted my story, hoping someone, anyone, could offer some advice. The responses were a mix of sympathy and skepticism, but one message stood out. It was from a user named Raven, who claimed to have dealt with similar entities before. Meet me, the message read. I can help you. I was hesitant, but I didn't have any other options. I agreed to meet Raven at a coffee shop in a nearby town. I didn't know what to expect, but I was desperate for any kind of solution. The coffee shop was small and cozy, a stark contrast to the terror that had become my life. I spotted Raven immediately, a tall woman with jet black hair and piercing blue eyes. She looked like she had seen some things, and I hoped she could help me. We sat down and I told her everything. She listened intently, nodding occasionally. When I was done, she leaned back and sighed. You're dealing with a very powerful entity, she said. It's attached to you through the game. We need to sever that connection. How? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. There's a ritual, she said, but it's dangerous. If we don't do it right, it could make things worse. I didn't care. I was out of options. I'll do whatever it takes, I said. Raven nodded. We'll need some supplies. Meet me at my place tonight. I agreed, feeling a flicker of hope for the first time in weeks. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of this nightmare. I spent the rest of the day in a state of anxious anticipation. Raven's place was a small, rundown house on the outskirts of the town. As night fell, I made my way there, clutching a flashlight in one hand and the knife in the other. The air was heavy, the silence oppressive. Every sound, every shadow set my nerves on edge. Raven greeted me at the door, her expression serious. Are you ready? She asked. I nodded, my throat dry. I have to be. She led me inside, and I couldn't help but notice the strange symbols and drawings covering the walls. Candles were placed strategically around the room, casting flickering shadows that danced eerily. In the center was a table covered in various items, herbs, crystals, and a large, ancient-looking book. We don't have much time, Raven said, lighting the candles. The entity will know what we're doing and will try to stop us. I swallowed hard, fear gnawing at my insides. What do I need to do? Follow my instructions exactly, she said. One mistake and we're both dead. She handed me a piece of chalk and instructed me to draw a circle on the floor. As I worked, she began to chant in a language I didn't recognize. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to close in around us. My hands shook, but I managed to complete the circle. Now stand inside, Raven said, her voice low and urgent. And whatever happens, do not leave the circle. I stepped into the circle, my heart pounding. Raven continued her chant, sprinkling herbs and salt around me. The room seemed to pulse with energy, a low hum that made my skin crawl. Suddenly, the candles flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness. I heard a growl, deep and menacing, followed by the sound of something moving in the shadows. Stay calm, Raven whispered. It's here. My breath caught in my throat as I saw the figure emerge from the darkness. It was taller than before, its red eyes glowing with malevolent intent. You can't escape, it hissed, its voice echoing in my mind. Raven continued her chant, louder now, more forceful. The figure stepped closer, but it couldn't cross the circle. It snarled, its twisted smile spreading wider. You think this will stop me? It taunted. You're mine. Hold your ground, Raven said, her voice strained. We're almost there. The figure lunged at me, its claws inches from my face, but an invisible barrier held it back. It howled in rage, thrashing against the circle. I could feel the force of its anger, a palpable wave of hatred. Raven's chant reached a crescendo, and the room filled with a blinding light. The figure screamed, a sound that pierced my very soul. It thrashed and writhed, its form flickering like a dying flame. And then, with a final agonizing scream, it vanished. The light faded, and the room fell silent. I collapsed to the floor, shaking and gasping for breath. Raven knelt beside me, her face pale but triumphant. It's over, she said softly. You're free. I wanted to believe her, but a lingering doubt gnawed at me. Are you sure? She nodded. The connection is severed. It can't hurt you anymore. I let out a shaky breath, the tension slowly leaving my body. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Thank you, I whispered, tears of relief streaming down my face. Raven helped me to my feet and handed me a small amulet. Keep this with you, she said. It will protect you from any lingering traces. I took the amulet, feeling its comforting weight in my hand. I don't know how to repay you. Raven smiled, a weary but kind expression. Just stay safe and stay away from the dark web. I left Raven's house that night, feeling lighter than I had in a long time. I returned to the motel, exhausted but hopeful. For the first time in weeks, I slept soundly, free from nightmares. But as the days passed, a nagging feeling of unease grew. I couldn't shake the sense that something was still watching me. I dismissed it as paranoia, a residual effect of the trauma. But deep down, I knew the truth. The figure might be gone, but the darkness it brought into my life was still there. A few days later, I received another message. You thought you could escape, it read. You're mine forever. Panic surged through me as I realized the figure wasn't gone. It had just been biding its time, waiting for the right moment to strike again. I was trapped in a never-ending nightmare, and there was no escape. I knew I had to do something, but what? I had already tried everything. Desperation led me back to the dark web, seeking answers, seeking a way to end this once and for all. I found a forum discussing the game, filled with stories similar to mine, people who had played it and faced the same horrors. One post stood out. It was from someone who claimed to have beaten the game and survived. Meet me, the message read. I can help you finish this. It was a risk, but I had no other options. I agreed to meet them, hoping against hope that this time I would find a way out of the nightmare. I was a mess of nerves as I drove to the meeting place, a secluded park on the edge of town. The sun was setting, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and twist ominously. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I had no idea who I was meeting, or if they could be trusted, but I was desperate. When I arrived, I saw a figure sitting on a bench, hood pulled low over their face. I parked and walked over, my heart pounding in my chest. You the one who posted about beating the game? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The figure nodded and pulled back their hood. It was a woman, probably in her 30s, with tired eyes and a haunted expression. "I'm Lily," she said. "You must be Ethan." I nodded, too anxious to be surprised that she knew my name. "How did you—" "I've been where you are," she interrupted. "That game, it's not just a game. It's a gateway, a way for something evil to latch onto you." I shivered, remembering the figure's red eyes and twisted smile. "How do I stop it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Lily glanced around, making sure we were alone. "There's a final level," she said. "Most people never make it there. But if you do, you have to face it head on. Destroy the source." "What's the source?" I asked, my heart sinking. She shook her head. "I don't know. It's different for everyone. But you'll know it when you see it. You have to confront it, no matter how terrifying it is." A cold dread settled in my stomach. "And if I can't?" "Then it will own you," she said simply. "Forever." The weight of her words hung in the air, suffocating me, but I had no choice. I had to try. "How do I get to the final level?" I asked. Lily pulled out a USB drive and handed it to me. "This will take you there, but be warned, it's not just a game anymore. It's real, and it's dangerous." I took the USB drive, my hand trembling. "Thank you," I said, my voice cracking. "Good luck, Ethan," she said. Her eyes filled with a sadness that made my chest ache. "You're going to need it." I drove back to the motel, my mind racing. The USB drive felt like a ticking time bomb in my pocket. When I got to my room, I locked the door and took a deep breath. I had to do this. I had to end it. I plugged the USB drive into my laptop and opened the file. The screen went black for a moment, and then the title screen appeared. The Black Room, Final Level. My hands were sweating, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I clicked start. The game loaded, and I found myself in a dark, twisted version of my own apartment. Every detail was identical, but everything was distorted, as if seen through a nightmare lens. Shadows moved on their own, and the air was thick with malice. I moved through the apartment, my hands shaking on the keyboard. The game was eerily silent, the only sound my own breathing. I reached the bedroom, and there it was, the figure, standing in the middle of the room, its red eyes glowing in the darkness. "You can't escape," it hissed, its voice sending chills down my spine. I took a deep breath and stepped forward. "I'm not afraid of you," I said, my voice trembling. "Not anymore." The figure laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. "You should be," it said. "You've only seen a fraction of my power." Suddenly, the room shifted, and I was standing in a dark, cold cavern. The figure was gone, replaced by a massive, pulsating heart, suspended in the air by twisted black tendrils. It beat slowly, each thump echoing through the cavern. I knew instinctively that this was the source. I had to destroy it. But as I stepped closer, I felt a wave of terror wash over me. Images flashed in my mind, my worst fears, my deepest regrets. I saw my parents' disappointed faces, the look of betrayal on my ex-girlfriend's face, the lifeless body of Matt. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "This isn't real." The heart throbbed faster, the tendrils writhing and reaching out for me. I could feel its hatred, its hunger. It wanted to consume me, to make me a part of it forever. But I couldn't let that happen. I forced myself to move forward, one step at a time, until I was standing right in front of it. I raised my hand, and with all the strength I could muster, I plunged the knife into the heart. A piercing scream filled the cavern, and the heart convulsed, the tendrils thrashing wildly. I held on, pushing the knife deeper, twisting it. The heart's beat became erratic, weaker. The cavern began to crumble, and I knew I had to finish it. With a final, desperate effort, I pulled the knife out and stabbed the heart again, this time with all my might. The heart exploded, and the force of the blast threw me backward. I hit the ground hard. The wind knocked out of me. When I opened my eyes, I was back in my motel room, the screen of my laptop dark. I sat up, my body aching, my mind reeling. Had it worked? Was it over? As I caught my breath, I noticed something on the screen. A final message, glowing faintly in the darkness. You are free. Tears filled my eyes as the weight of the past few weeks lifted off my shoulders. It was over. I was finally free. But as I sat there, relief washing over me, a nagging doubt lingered. Was it really over? Or was this just another part of the game? Even though the screen said I was free, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't truly over. The fear had taken root deep inside me, and I doubted everything. Sleep was a distant memory, and every noise, every shadow, made my heart race. But I tried to believe, to trust that it was finally over. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. I took a long shower, letting the hot water wash away the grime and fear. I scrubbed until my skin was raw, as if trying to erase the horror I had endured. When I stepped out, I felt lighter, cleaner. But that night, as I lay in bed, the doubts crept back in. I stared at the ceiling, waiting for something to happen. Hours passed, and nothing did. Slowly, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into a fitful sleep. I woke to the sound of footsteps in my room. My eyes snapped open, and my heart stopped. In the darkness, I could see a figure standing at the foot of my bed. Panic surged through me as I fumbled for the light. When the room flooded with light, the figure was gone. I sat up shaking, my eyes darting around the room. It was empty. My mind was playing tricks on me, I told myself. It had to be. I tried to calm down, taking deep breaths, but the fear was relentless. The next few days were a blur. I was constantly on edge, jumping at every sound, every shadow. I couldn't focus, couldn't think. The messages had stopped. The game was gone, but the fear remained. I knew I had to do something, or I would lose my mind. Desperation led me back to Raven. I found her at a local cafe, sipping coffee and reading a book. She looked up as I approached, her eyes narrowing in concern. "Ethan, what's wrong?" "It's not over," I said, my voice trembling. "I thought it was, but it's not. I keep seeing things, hearing things." Raven sighed, motioning for me to sit. "I warned you it would be difficult. These things don't just disappear overnight. It takes time to heal." "I don't have time," I said, my voice breaking. "I can't live like this." Raven studied me for a moment, then nodded. "There's one more thing we can try," she said, "but it's risky. Are you willing to take that risk?" I nodded without hesitation. "I'll do anything." "Meet me at my house tonight," she said. "We'll finish this once and for all." That evening, I returned to Raven's house. She was waiting for me, the candles already lit, the symbols drawn on the floor. This time, there was something different in her eyes, a steely determination that gave me a glimmer of hope. "We're going to confront it," she said, handing me a small vial filled with a dark liquid. "Drink this. It will open your mind to the spirit world, but be careful. The line between reality and illusion will blur." I took the vial. my hand trembling. What if it doesn't work? It will, she said firmly. It has to. I uncorked the vial and drank the liquid in one gulp. It tasted bitter, burning as it went down. Almost immediately, I felt a dizzying sensation, as if the room was spinning. Raven guided me to the circle, and I sat down, trying to steady myself. She began to chant, her voice low and rhythmic. The room grew colder, and I felt a pressure in my chest. My vision blurred, and I saw shadows moving, coalescing into a familiar shape. The figure. It was back, but this time, I was ready. "You can't scare me," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "I'm not afraid of you." The figure laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the room. "You should be," it hissed. "You've seen nothing yet." Suddenly, I was no longer in Raven's house. I was in the cavern again, facing the heart. But this time, I wasn't alone. The figure stood beside it, its eyes burning with hatred. "This is your final chance," it said. "Submit, and I'll spare you. Fight, and you'll suffer." I took a deep breath, gripping the knife Raven had given me. "I'm done being afraid," I said. "I'm done running." With a shout, I lunged at the heart, plunging the knife into its pulsating flesh. The figure screamed, a sound that shook the very ground beneath me. The heart thrashed, black blood pouring out. But I didn't stop. I stabbed it again and again, each strike filled with all the fear and anger I had bottled up inside. The heart exploded in a burst of dark energy, and I was thrown back. When I opened my eyes, I was back in Raven's house, lying on the floor. The room was silent, the air still. The figure was gone. Raven knelt beside me, her face filled with relief. "You did it," she said softly. "It's over." I sat up slowly, my body aching, but my mind clear. For the first time in weeks, the fear was gone. I was free. In the days that followed, I began to rebuild my life. The nightmares stopped, and the messages ceased. I moved to a new town, started a new job, and slowly began to feel like myself again. But I never forgot what happened. The darkness, the fear, the figure, they were a part of me now, a reminder of the nightmare I had survived. And though I was free, I knew that I had to be careful. The dark web was a dangerous place, filled with things beyond our understanding. I had learned that the hard way. Now, I'm sharing my story as a warning. Be careful what you seek out in the dark corners of the internet. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. And some nightmares, once begun, can never be truly ended.